The soup bowl tipped from Darnell's hand, but his hand wasn't slipping. Celeste felt the burn across her collarbone at the head of the family table, 12 guests frozen, her 2 children watching from their chairs. Simone set down her wine glass and laughed first. Darnell straightened his cufflinks. The scar beneath Celeste's jaw was older than this marriage. Nobody at that table knew what she had already signed. The liquid was not boiling. He had made sure of that. Hot enough to leave a mark, controlled enough to be explained away. That was the architecture of everything Darnell Okafor did, the calculation beneath the cruelty, the plausible deniability wrapped around every wound. The burn ran from Celeste's collarbone across her left shoulder and soaked through the cream silk blouse she had pressed that morning, the one she had chosen carefully because his mother was coming, because 12 people would be at that table, because appearances, even now, were the last form of armor she had left. She did not scream. She did not stand. She pressed both palms flat against the mahogany and breathed through it while the heat spread. Darnell set the bowl down slowly. He looked at her with his head tilted, the way a man looks at a spill he finds inconvenient. "You should have stayed quiet," he said. "You know how you get when you drink." She had not been drinking. There was no wine at her place setting. Every person at that table could see there was no wine at her place setting. His mother looked down at her plate. His business partner, Reginald Ashford, reached for the serving spoon like nothing had interrupted him. The children, Nadia, 9 years old, and Kofi, 7, sat perfectly still across the table, the way children sit when they have learned that stillness is safer than reaction. Simone came out of the kitchen. She had not been invited back to the kitchen by anyone at the table. She knew where Celeste kept the napkins because she had been inside this house enough times to know. She brought one to Darnell, not to Celeste. She set it in Darnell's hand and let her fingers rest against his wrist for a moment longer than necessary, and she looked at Celeste while she did it. "You should put some cold water on that," Simone said. Her voice had the particular softness of a woman performing concern for an audience. "It'll swell if you don't." Celeste looked at her children. Nadia's eyes were wide and fixed on her mother's shoulder. Kofi had pushed his chair back 2 inches. Celeste gave them one small nod. The nod that meant, "I am still here. Stay where you are. I am still here." And then she stood, folded Darnell's napkin, set it on the table beside her plate, and walked out of the dining room without another word. She did not run. She did not rush. She walked the way she always walked through that house, like she had built it, because in every way that actually mattered, she had. But he didn't know she had already made one phone call, 3 weeks before that dinner, to a number she had memorized and never saved in her phone. That night, Celeste sat in the east guest room. She had not slept in the master bedroom in 4 months, with a damp cloth pressed to her shoulder and her reflection caught in the darkened window glass across from her. The burn had begun to blister at one edge. She looked at it with the focused attention of a woman taking inventory, not a woman grieving. The amber prescription bottle on the counter beside the sink had her name on it. Below her name, the prescribing physician, Dr. Adrienne Voss, M.D. Reconstructive Surgery, Mercy General Hospital. She had been taking the medication for 3 years, since the surgery, since the recovery that Darnell had told everyone was from a car accident on the freeway, since the story that everyone had accepted because Darnell told it calmly, and Celeste had not corrected him. She picked up the bottle and looked at the name. Dr. Voss. She set it back down. In the kitchen downstairs, she could hear Simone laughing. Not the polite laugh of a guest, the easy laugh of a woman who has stopped pretending to be temporary. Celeste had known for longer than anyone understood. She had known, and she had stayed. Not because she was afraid, not because she had nowhere to go, but because leaving without the right document was the same as losing. And Celeste Okafor did not lose. She had simply not yet found what she came back for. Her daughter, Nadia, appeared in the doorway. She was still in her dinner dress. She held her stuffed rabbit by one ear, the ear that had been re-sewn twice. She looked at her mother's shoulder. "Does it hurt?" Nadia asked. Celeste moved the damp cloth. Less than it did an hour ago. Nadia crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. She was 9 years old, and she had her grandmother's eyes, the ones that saw everything and stored it. "Are we going to be okay?" Celeste looked at her daughter. She did not flinch, and she did not perform comfort. She told her the truth in the only language a child can hold. "We are going to be better than okay, but it's going to take a little longer." Nadia nodded like that was the answer she'd been waiting for. She set the rabbit on the pillow beside her mother, climbed down, and went back to her room. Celeste looked at the rabbit. She looked at the prescription bottle. She looked at her reflection in the window. The marriage had turned in the 3rd year. Not loudly, structurally. Accounts removed from her name with forms she was told were routine. A clause in a trust document that her own attorney had flagged once, and then, after a conversation she was not part of, had stopped flagging. The charity boards she had joined at his request, the Okafor Family Charitable Foundation boards, where she shook hands and gave speeches and raised credibility for a name that was being used for something she hadn't yet been able to prove. She had built this man's public image the way a mason builds a wall, brick by brick, relationship by relationship, year by year. And he had used that wall to hide behind. But walls have foundations, and she knew where this one was poured. She just needed the paperwork to prove it. 3 days after the dinner, Celeste's phone showed her own face on a news site. The headline called her a private family matter. Darnell had issued a press release before he'd filed anything with his attorneys. That was deliberate. Narrative first, legal second. Control what people believe before they can ask questions. He had been doing this her entire marriage. The press release did not mention hot water or a cream blouse or 2 children who had pushed back from the table. It said the separation was mutual. It said Celeste had struggled privately with wellness challenges. It said Darnell remained committed to co-parenting with compassion and care. She read it twice. Then she set her phone face down on the hotel nightstand and stared at the ceiling for exactly as long as she needed to. And then she stopped. Her phone buzzed again. A local news alert. Simona had given an interview. Same afternoon, same hour as the press release. Coordinated. Not coincidental. Simone stood at the entrance of the Okafor Foundation offices in a structured blazer, speaking in the measured tone of a woman who has rehearsed. She stood with her shoulders back and her chin level, and she looked directly into the camera and she said, "I'm genuinely concerned for the children. Darnell has been carrying this alone for years. I just want what's best for the family." The family. She said the family about a family she had helped dismantle from the inside, in a house she had been walking through for 2 years, using dishes she had not bought, touching a man she had not earned. Behind Simone in the footage, visible over her left shoulder, the lobby of the Okafor Foundation. The key card reader above the entrance glowed green. She was already badged in. Her name was on the building's internal directory. Someone had made those changes, and they had not made them that morning. The next morning, Simone appeared again. This time at Nadia and Kofi's school. Pickup from a car Celeste recognized as Darnell's second vehicle, the gray one. Celeste was not there to see it. The school's administrative assistant called her to report it, professional and careful, because she had worked at that school for 11 years, and she knew whose name was on the original enrollment paperwork, and she believed in doing things correctly. She introduced herself to the front desk, the assistant said quietly. She said she was family. Celeste thanked her. She wrote the date and time in a notebook she had been keeping since the day after the dinner. Every date, every detail, every call. 2 days later, Darnell's mother, Loretta, called. Her voice was warm in the practiced way of a woman who had decided on an outcome before she dialed. She said she was devastated by her son's behavior. She said she couldn't sleep. She asked Celeste to lunch at Olmsted Garden, the restaurant where Celeste and Darnell had celebrated their 5th anniversary. The choice of restaurant was not accidental. Nothing Loretta did was accidental. She was her son's mother in every sense of the word. At the table, Loretta ordered the salmon. She straightened her silverware. She spoke for 11 minutes about family legacy, about the children, about her own marriage, and what she had endured and what endurance required. She used the word sacrifice 4 times. Then she reached into her handbag and slid a white envelope across the white tablecloth. Celeste looked at it. She did not touch it. "He wants this to be clean," Loretta said. Her voice was very gentle. 60 days to transition out of the estate, a monthly figure, not ungenerous. She paused. "There's a non-disclosure component, standard language." "Standard," Celeste said, "for everyone's protection." "Whose protection, specifically?" Loretta's hands folded over each other on the table. "The children's." Celeste looked at her for a moment. She thought about the children Loretta had watched sit frozen at a dinner table 3 days ago. She thought about Kofi reaching for her and Darnell catching his arm. She picked up the envelope. She put it in her bag. She ordered coffee. She looked out the window at the autumn garden, and she said nothing else about the envelope for the rest of the lunch. Loretta filled the silence. She always had. It was the primary skill of a woman who had spent 50 years making peace with things that deserved no peace. She had sat at that dinner table. She had looked down at her plate when the bowl tipped. By Monday, she was her son's delivery service. What he said to Celeste through his mother's mouth that afternoon only confirmed what Celeste had already written in her notebook. No one inside that family was going to help her. She had known it. But there is a difference between knowing a thing and sitting across a white tablecloth, while someone you once called your mother serves you the paperwork for your own erasure. She felt both weights separately, and she carried them both, and she ordered a second cup of coffee, and she did not let her hand shake when she lifted it. 2 weeks after the lunch, Celeste returned to the estate to collect the children's things. She was given 1 hour. A housekeeper she had hired 7 years ago walked 3 steps behind her and did not make eye contact. Darnell was not there. He had made sure he was not there. She moved through the house efficiently. The children's rooms, Nadia's books arranged by color on the shelf, Kofi's cleats in the closet, both pairs. She took what her children needed and left what could be replaced. Then she walked to Darnell's office. She did not plan to go in. She had passed the door and the drawer was open, not fully, but enough. And the habit of 12 years of managing his affairs made her stop. She had organized that office for a decade. She knew every drawer. Inside, a manila envelope. The letterhead was from Mercy General Hospital, her hospital, the one where Dr. Adrienne Voss had reconstructed the left side of her face 3 years ago after an injury that Darnell had described to the attending as a car accident, and Celeste, from the gurney, too fractured to hold a full thought, had not corrected him. The document inside was not about her. It was a payment authorization. a shell entity, Okafor Wellness. Partners LLC had routed funds to a consulting account. The amounts were large. They were quarterly. The authorizing signature on the medical records. Suppression addendum belonged to the same physician whose name was on the amber prescription bottle back at her hotel. Dr. Adrienne Voss. Celeste's hand did not shake. She photographed every page. She counted them, 11 pages, and photographed each one twice, from 2 angles. She placed the envelope back exactly as she found it. She picked up her children's bag, walked to the front door, and left 4 minutes before her hour was up. She had been waiting for a document to surface. She had not expected it to be this one. She had not expected it to lead where it was about to lead. She made the call from a bench in Riverside Park, 3 blocks from her hotel, with the children at school and the autumn light cutting low through the trees. She dialed Dr. Voss directly, not the office line. The number from the prescription bottle's follow-up card, the personal cell that Dr. Voss had written in ink and handed to her at discharge, saying, "Call me if anything changes." It rang 4 times. Then, "This is Adrian." "Dr. Voss." Celeste looked at the river. "This is Celeste Okafor. I need to ask you about a payment authorization. I need you to tell me if it's real." Silence, long enough to mean something. Then, "Where are you right now?" "A park, alone." "Are you safe?" Celeste considered the question the way you consider a question that you have not been asked in a long time. "Yes. Come to my office, not the hospital office." A pause. "I'll send you the address." They met the following morning in a building on Meridian Street that had no sign above the door, the kind of professional suite occupied by people whose work requires discretion. Dr. Adrienne Voss was 53 years old, with close-cropped silver natural hair and reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the particular stillness of a woman who had spent decades delivering news that changed lives in rooms that smelled like antiseptic. She did not offer coffee. She did not make small talk. She sat across from Celeste, placed a folder on the table between them, and opened it. "The account is real," Dr. Voss said. "Okafor Wellness Partners. I was approached 6 weeks after your surgery by a man named Hargrove. He said he represented your husband's family office. He called it a consulting retainer." She paused. "He did not explain what I was consulting on." "But you knew," Celeste said. "I knew it was not consulting." Dr. Voss looked at her steadily. "I took it, and I kept every original file, the full surgical record, the intake documentation, the photographs." She opened the folder further. "Including what your injuries actually were, and how they were consistent with repeated blunt force trauma over an extended period. Not a car accident, not any kind of accident." Celeste looked at the medical photographs for the first time since they were taken. She had asked not to see them then. She had been in a state where the body makes the decision for you, where looking at something true would have required energy she needed for breathing. She looked at them now, without looking away. She studied them with the same careful attention she had given to the 11 pages in Darnell's office drawer. "He told everyone it was a freeway accident," Celeste said. "He told the attending physician. He told his family. He told mine." "He told them," Dr. Voss said, "and nobody asked me directly. Nobody filed an insurance dispute. Nobody requested the original intake file." She closed the folder. "So the file sat, and then the payment came, and the file sat with a suppression flag on it, and I let it sit because I was not yet certain what I was going to do." "What made you certain?" Celeste asked. Dr. Voss was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed on Meridian Street. A bus. Then quiet again. "The second file," she said, "and then the third." What she showed Celeste next was the first revelation, and it reframed everything Celeste had survived by renaming it. The payment account was real, but it was not about protecting Darnell's reputation from one incident. Dr. Voss pulled a second file, a third, 3 separate hospital visits over 6 years, different facilities, different insurance carriers, different names, each one traceable through careful cross-referencing to an LLC registered under Darnell's holding company. He had not reacted to what he had done. He had planned around it. He had built financial entities designed to make each visit look isolated, unrelated, routine. He had created a system, and systems require maintenance. Systems require people. He registered the LLCs himself? Celeste asked. 2 of them. Dr. Voss turned a page and slid it across the table. The third was co-signed. She had been waiting for this moment for 2 years. She didn't smile. She looked at the co-signature line and read the name there and felt the name land in her chest the way a stone lands in still water. A sound, then a ring, then expanding quiet. Reginald Ashford. The man who had refilled his wine glass, the man who had been called Darnell's oldest friend for the entirety of their marriage, who had stood as a groomsman at their wedding, who had held Kofi at his christening, who had been in that dining room 3 weeks ago and had known what kind of man was sitting at the head of that table and had chosen again and again and again to refill his glass instead. Celeste set the page down carefully. "There's more," she said. It was not a question. Dr. Voss nodded. She picked up a second folder, thicker, the kind that has been assembled over time with intention. The foundation. The Okafor Family Charitable Foundation had been established 11 years ago. It was publicly registered, federally tax-exempt, positioned as one of the most significant pillars of Black philanthropic legacy in this city. Its annual gala was one of the most photographed events on the social calendar. It had government contracts. It had federal matching funds. It had, for 9 of those 11 years, a public face named Celeste Okafor, who shook hands and gave speeches and raised credibility for a name that was being used as cover for something she had not been able to see because she had been inside it, working in good faith, believing it was real. She had been the face of it. She had been the reason donors trusted it. She had been the reason the federal grants renewed. She had been, without knowing it, the most valuable component of a $2 billion fraud. "How long has the siphoning been happening?" Celeste asked. 7 years, consistent, quarterly. Dr. Voss laid the transfer records across the table in a line. "The same shell accounts used to pay me, Okafor Wellness Partners and 2 subsidiaries, received transfers from the foundation endowment at regular intervals. When you map the transfers against the audited statements the foundation filed publicly, the gap becomes visible." She paused. "Not visible to a casual reader, but visible to a forensic auditor, or to an OIG consultant who has seen this structure before. Everyone in that room would remember exactly where they were standing when they understood the full shape of what Darnell had built. But that room was still 3 weeks away. "You have a joint appointment with the OIG," Celeste said. She had done her own research in the 2 days between finding the drawer and making the call. "Forensic medical consultant, 2 years. Dr. Voss looked at her without blinking. "I have seen cases where financial crimes ran through medical record suppression. I have waited for the patient with the standing to bring this forward." She paused. "You have standing. You are the foundation's co-founder. You are a documented victim of the suppression payment, and you have the drawer photographs." "What do you need from me?" Celeste asked. "A statement, access to the photographs, and your presence at one specific moment." Dr. Voss picked up her pen. "I need you to tell me when." Celeste looked at the amber prescription bottle she had set on the edge of the table when she arrived, the habit of always knowing where her medication was, the habit that had traveled with her through every room she had occupied in the past 3 years. She thought about Nadia, asking, "Are we going to be okay?" And about the answer she had given, the truthful answer, the one about better than okay, and a little longer. She thought about Kofi's cleats in their bags. She thought about the cream blouse in the hotel closet, still stained, still holding the shape of that evening. "Tell me about the gala," she said. The Okafor Foundation Annual Legacy Gala fell on a Thursday in November. The ballroom at the Meridian Grand held 400 guests. The event was being filmed for regional broadcast. The foundation's largest federal grant renewal, $40 million, was scheduled to be announced from the podium at 9 p.m. White tablecloths, tall centerpieces, crystal that caught the chandelier light and threw it in small, bright pieces across the ceiling. The kind of room that was designed to make people feel like they were inside something important. Darnell gave his pre-event interview at 7:30, standing in the lobby with the foundation's ceremonial pin on his lapel. The compass, Rose, the one Celeste had sketched the original design for on a napkin at a restaurant 8 years ago because she believed in what they were building. He was relaxed in the way of a man who has never been publicly cornered. He spoke about legacy. He spoke about community. He mentioned Celeste once. He called her situation a private family matter and smiled at the camera, and the reporter nodded and moved on to the grant announcement. And Darnell watched himself in the monitor beside the camera and liked what he saw. He had made one critical error. His legal team had moved fast on the estate paperwork, on the account separations, on the custody filing. They had moved fast on everything except the foundation. Her board credentials, her name, her access level, her guest clearance for all foundation events had never been formally revoked. The paperwork had been started. It had not been completed. In the rush to control the narrative, someone had filed what looked finished before it was finished, and Darnell had not checked because he was certain she would never come back to a room he had made her feel unwelcome in. He had never understood the difference between a woman who is gone and a woman who is waiting. Simone arrived at 7:45 in a gown chosen by Darnell's stylist, deep burgundy, structured at the shoulder, the kind of dress designed to be remembered in photographs. She moved through the ballroom before the doors opened to general guests, touching centerpieces with the proprietary ease of a host, introducing herself to board members she had met once as though they were old colleagues. She wore a smile that was doing significant work. She stopped beside the wife of a board member named Lawrence, a woman named Gloria, who had been involved with the foundation since its second year, who had sat on the Women's Outreach Committee that Celeste had chaired, who remembered things. "I'm going to be chairing the Women's Health Initiative starting in January," Simone said. She held her champagne glass at the stem. "I've already been talking to Darnell about the direction. I think we can really expand the reach." Gloria said, "That's interesting." She said nothing else. She looked at Simone for a moment and then looked back at the room. 3 other people were within earshot. All of them heard. All of them would remember. Dr. Adrienne Voss arrived at 8 o'clock. She wore a dark green dress, and her silver hair was pinned. She signed in at the registration table, received her name badge, and took her seat near the front of the room at the board members' table. She placed her evening bag on the chair beside her. She did not look at the door. She had already done everything she needed to do before arriving. The packets, 11 copies, each containing the full documentation, had been delivered by courier at 5 p.m. to the Office of the Inspector General, to 2 federal oversight bodies, and to the Foundation's independent auditors. She had signed the transmittal forms herself. She had photographed the signed receipts. She had sent the photographs to Celeste's phone. Celeste had looked at the photographs. Then she had gotten dressed. The tabloid image circulating on social media that evening showed Celeste leaving her hotel 3 days prior, head down, coat drawn, shoulders curved inward. It was an image she had produced deliberately. A coat borrowed from a woman she trusted, an exit through a side door, exactly one photographer positioned to catch it. She had staged her own apparent defeat the way you set bait, with patience and precise placement, and only when you are ready for what follows. At 8:58, the side corridor door opened. She had been waiting for this moment for 2 years. She didn't smile. She was wearing a structured black dress with a high collar, and the collar covered her collarbone and the left shoulder. The shoulder that had burned, the one that had blistered against cream silk, the one that had carried the proof of what kind of man lived beneath the ceremonial pin and the press releases and the televised smile, was visible. She had chosen this dress because it covered what she chose to cover and revealed what she chose to reveal, and everything about the way she walked into that room had been chosen. The slim black portfolio in her hand, the angle of her chin, the pace of her steps across the ballroom floor. She did not look at Darnell's table. She looked at the podium. Security moved. 2 men from the back of the room, their earpieces catching the light as they turned toward the stage. Dr. Voss was already standing. She looked at the nearer guard and said 2 words in a level voice. His hand dropped. He looked at his colleague. His colleague shook his head once, and they both held their position. 400 people were watching. The program had stopped. The board chairman was still at the podium, mouth open, the grant announcement unsaid. Celeste stepped to the podium. She waited for the chairman to step aside. He did, after a moment that lasted longer than it should have, because he was a man who understood what was happening before it had fully happened, and he was choosing, in real time, which side he wanted to be found on. She opened the portfolio. She looked up at the room. "My name is Celeste Okafor," she said. "I have been a member of this foundation's board for 9 years. I helped establish the Women's Outreach Program, the Youth Scholarship Fund, and the community health partnerships that this foundation has used as the face of its public mission." She let that settle for one breath. "I need to tell you what this foundation has actually been doing with your money." What happened next was what everyone would tell differently later, the way witnesses always remember the sequence of a significant event from the place where they were standing when it began. But the sequence was this. Celeste named the shell companies. She named Okafor Wellness Partners. She named the subsidiaries. She placed printed documentation on the podium and stated clearly that copies had been delivered 3 hours ago to the Inspector General's office, to 2 federal agencies, and to the Foundation's own auditors. Tonight, before she walked in. The documentation was already in hands that could not be called back. Then she reached into the portfolio and removed a small digital recorder, no larger than a tube of lipstick. She pressed play. Darnell's voice came through the ballroom speakers, the same voice that had given a televised interview 40 minutes ago in the lobby of this building. Unmistakable. Confident in the recording the way he was confident in everything. The confidence of a man speaking to someone he trusted absolutely, in a room he believed was private. "He confirmed it," Darnell said in the recording, "and we confirmed the payment. The file is suppressed. That's the end of it." The recording lasted 12 seconds. 12 seconds of a man disposing of his wife's medical records the way you dispose of a bill you do not intend to pay. Darnell's face moved through 4 expressions in the silence that followed, and every person at his table watched all 4 of them. The first was the smile, the reflex, the automatic response of a man who has never been cornered in public, the expression that lives in the muscle memory of men who have gotten away with things for long enough that they begin to believe that getting away with things is simply their nature. The smile was genuine. It held for 11 seconds. On the 12th second, he looked at Reginald Ashford. Reginald was looking at his phone beneath the table. He did not look up. Darnell looked at Simone. She had already stepped back, not dramatically, but measurably. One full step away from the chair she had occupied beside him, creating a distance that the people around her could see and would later describe in precise detail. He reached up and touched the ceremonial pin on his lapel. The compass rose. He touched it the way a man touches the thing he is about to lose, the gesture of someone whose hand has moved toward a familiar object in the hope that it is still there and finds it changed. Celeste looked at the section of the room where Simone stood and said, in the same measured voice, without raising it, "The Women's Health Initiative discussed for next year was funded in part through the siphoned endowment. Ms. Simone Brathwaite signed one document as a witness to a transfer authorization. Her signature is on page 7. Page 7 is in every packet that was delivered tonight." Simone's hand, which had reached reflexively back toward Darnell's arm, stopped, withdrew. She took another step back, then one more. The radius around her changed in the room, the way radius changes when the center of something shifts, and the people nearest to her responded to it before they understood why they were responding. Gloria, the board member's wife, was standing 6 feet away. She looked at Simone. She thought about, "I've already been talking to Darnell about the direction." She thought about the champagne glass held at the stem and the easy, proprietary smile. She would put all of it in an interview that she would give, calmly and completely, within the week. The silence before the broader reaction lasted 4 full seconds. 400 people, and the air system above them, and someone's glass set down too carefully, somewhere in the middle of the room. 4 seconds of a room understanding what it had just witnessed and reorganizing itself around that understanding. Then the board member named Lawrence stood, slowly, the way a man stands when he is standing for the record. Then a second board member. Then the federal liaison in the 3rd row, who had been sitting with the professional stillness of a man present in an official capacity all evening, reached for his phone, stood, and began moving toward the side corridor with the measured purpose of someone who has a next step already prepared and is simply executing it. Darnell watched him go. For the first time in the 12 years Celeste had known him, he had nothing to say. The smile was gone. The pin was still on his lapel. He was still wearing it when they asked him to leave. The 48 hours that followed happened in the specific, mundane way that institutional destruction always happens. Not dramatically, but procedurally. The federal grant suspension came in a letter. The foundation's name was removed from government partnership listings. The board voted for independent receivership in an emergency session held at 6 a.m. on a Friday. The name came off the building on a Tuesday. A 2-man crew with a scaffold. 3 people photographed it from the sidewalk. None of them were journalists. They were people who lived nearby and believed that some things should be witnessed even when nobody asks. Reginald Ashford issued a statement. It contained the phrase, "I was not aware of the full scope," a construction that satisfied no one and existed only to give his lawyers something to point at. The co-signatures were in the federal file. Statements do not erase co-signatures. Simone's name trended for 6 days, not for the gala, for the interview Gloria gave. 4 minutes, hands folded, voice level, describing exactly what Simone had said about the Women's Health Initiative in front of witnesses before it all came apart. The interview was watched 11 million times. Simone did not respond. The initiative dissolved before it had a name. Darnell's attorneys negotiated. There is no negotiation that removes a man's voice from a 12-second recording that 400 people heard live and that federal investigators had already logged. The outcome had been set the moment Celeste photographed 11 pages in an unlocked drawer and left 4 minutes early. She did not give interviews. She did not post. She was available for one thing: her children. 2 weeks after the gala, she stood at the curb outside Nadia and Kofi's school during afternoon pickup, hands in the pockets of her coat, watching the doors. The school smelled like October. Wet leaves, chalk, the particular cold that comes in through heavy doors every time they open and close. Around her, other parents stood in clusters or checked their phones. Nobody spoke to her. That was fine. Then someone stood beside her, close enough to be intentional. She was a woman Celeste recognized after a moment. Someone who had been at the family dinner, one of the 12 guests, seated near the far end of the table, close to Loretta. A woman named Denise, who had been Darnell's cousin's college roommate and had been present at Okafor family events for 15 years. She was looking at the school doors, not at Celeste. "I handed him the napkin," Denise said. "That night, I was sitting 2 seats down and I passed it to him before Simone even came out of the kitchen." She stopped. "I should have said something. I am sorry I handed him the napkin." Celeste looked at the school doors. They opened and Kofi came through first, backpack bouncing, looking for her with his whole face, the way 7-year-olds look for the person they are certain of. Nadia was 3 steps behind him, measured, already scanning the crowd the way her mother had taught her without meaning to. Celeste raised her hand so they could find her. "You're saying something now," she told Denise. Denise nodded once, and Celeste felt the nod more than she saw it. And then Kofi was at her side with his arms around her waist, and Nadia was standing in front of her with the expression of a child who had been waiting all day to make sure her mother was still whole. Celeste put her hand on Nadia's shoulder. She felt her daughter lean in. She held the weight of that leaning. The Saturday morning light came in through the kitchen window above the sink and fell across the counter in one long, unbroken stripe. The kitchen was smaller than the estate kitchen. It did not have a 12-seat mahogany table. It had a round table with 4 chairs, and Nadia and Kofi were at 2 of them, eating, talking over each other about something that happened at school on Friday. The comfortable noise of children who have been told the truth and have begun to trust that the truth was survivable. Celeste stood at the counter with the amber prescription bottle in her hand. She opened it. She removed the last capsule, set it beside a glass of water, and then looked at the bottle. Dr. Voss had called on Wednesday. 3 years of post-surgical monitoring, complete. The follow-up imaging was clear. The reconstruction had held exactly as intended. She no longer needed the medication. She was cleared. She set the empty bottle on the windowsill where the light was. The cream blouse was not in this house. It was not in storage. It was in a federal evidence file somewhere, bagged, labeled, documented, serving the last function it would ever serve. She did not need to see it again. It had done its job, and she had done hers, and neither of them needed to be displayed to prove it. On the counter beside the amber bottle was a photograph in a small wooden frame. Celeste's grandmother, Ida Mae Celestine, standing in front of Greater Faith Baptist Church in her Sunday dress, hat pinned at an angle, chin level, looking directly into the camera with the expression of a woman who has decided that the world will not determine her posture. The photograph had been taken in 1971. Celeste had carried it in every move she had made since her grandmother died. It had been on the nightstand in the east guest room at the estate. She had packed it herself, the first night before she packed anything else. Nadia pushed back from the table and wandered to the counter. She picked up the photograph, the way children pick up things that have weight, with both hands, carefully, the way you handle something you sense belongs to everyone. "Who is she?" Nadia asked. "Your great-great-grandmother," Celeste said. "Ida May. She raised 4 children by herself and owned her house outright by the time she was 43. She paused. She never raised her voice in anger. People said you always knew where you stood with her because she was quiet and she meant it. Nadia looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then she set it back on the counter, exactly where it had been, and returned to the table. Celeste turned back to the window. The amber bottle sat on the sill, catching the morning light, empty and clean and finished. Below it, through the glass, the small yard. Still, the kind of still that comes after a long season of noise. Above the yard, the sky was the particular blue that belongs only to Saturday mornings in November. The blue that means nothing is required of you today. The blue that means you are here, and it is enough. She had bought this house 14 months ago. Before the dinner, before the press release, before the gala. She had purchased it quietly, in her own name, with her own funds. Through an account Darnell had never known existed because she had opened it the same week she first saw the clause in the trust document. The clause her attorney had flagged and then stopped flagging, and had understood that the time to prepare a door is before you need it. She had already paid for that window. Every last brick. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. Because the women in these stories are never really gone. They were just standing at a window they already owned, waiting for the light to catch it right.